Never hand the keys to a man who cannot build the engine. My boss thought he could strip my access, forge safety metrics on a $40 million hardware pitch, and leave me to take the fall. He forgot one crucial detail about the tech he tried to sell. I wrote the liability contracts. The trap I set did not just get him fired, it legally repossessed his entire department during a live pitch. Hello and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. As many of you know, YouTube has unfortunately disabled our monetization, leaving us with no budget to keep this channel running. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon, where you will find even more incredible, exclusive true stories fully voiced by multiple emotional actors that we simply cannot share on YouTube. You can join us right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link down in the description or the pinned comment. Now, let us dive into today's story, told from the perspective of Emery Rivera. The air inside Etherius Dynamics always smelled vaguely of cold brew coffee and manufactured optimism. It was the kind of forced, sterile cheerfulness that made you want to scream into a server rack. I am Emery Rivera, a tech risk management specialist in my early 30s, and I had spent the last 3 years keeping this company's hardware from exploding and killing people. But in the modern tech sector, preventing a catastrophe does not get you a corner office. Synergizing a paradigm shift does. That brings us to Marcus Vance. Marcus was our new head of product, a transplant from the startup world who exclusively wore designer t-shirts that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. He was a man built entirely out of buzzwords, hollow confidence, and a stunning lack of actual engineering knowledge. He did not know how our proprietary tech, the AeroCore engine, actually functioned. He only knew how to sell the idea of it. On a dreary Tuesday morning, I was running my routine diagnostic sweeps on the AeroCore testing logs. The AeroCore was our flagship project, a high-density energy turbine that was supposed to revolutionize industrial power. But physics is a stubborn mistress. As I scrolled through the thermal readouts from the weekend stress tests, a cold knot formed in my stomach. The data was too clean. The temperature variance curves, which normally spiked and dipped as the engine strained under intense pressure, had been completely flattened. Someone had scrubbed the thermal logs to hide a massive, critical overheating flaw. The engine was not stable. It was a ticking thermal bomb. I printed the unedited raw logs and marched straight to Marcus's office. He was sitting on a plush ergonomic ball, aggressively typing on his laptop. I dropped the binder of raw data onto his glass desk. "Marcus, we have a massive problem with the AeroCore," I said, pointing at the highlighted spikes. "The thermal regulators are failing under 90% load. Someone altered the final database to hide a heat spike of over 400 degrees. If we push this to production, the casing will melt." Marcus did not even look at the data. He leaned back, steeled his fingers, and offered me a patronizing, corporate smile. "Emery, Emery, Emery," he sighed, as if explaining addition to a toddler. "You are looking at this through a highly restrictive, legacy mindset. We are not hiding anything. We are simply engaging in some data optimization for our Series C fundraising push. It is all about framing the narrative for the investors." "Framing the narrative," I repeated, my voice tight. "Marcus, this is hardware, not a software patch. You cannot optimize a physical fire. If that core overheats in a live environment, it is not a narrative, it is a massive liability. We will iterate on the thermal issues in Phase 2, he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Right now, we need alignment. I need you to be a team player. Emery, do not bottleneck our growth with hypothetical negativity." I left his office with my jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. I knew exactly what he was doing, but I did not realize how fast he was moving to silence me. The very next morning, I logged into my workstation, ready to pull the background telemetry data to build a stronger case for the internal ethics board. My screen flashed a bright, mocking yellow banner. "Access denied, current permission level view only." My administrative privileges to the safety testing servers, the access I had held for 3 years, had been revoked overnight. There was no email, no notification from IT, just a silent, digital gag order. At 10 o'clock, the daily reporting meeting began. I walked into the conference room, ready to demand my access back, only to find someone else sitting in my usual chair. It was Tyler, a new intern who looked like he had just graduated from a frat house and who thought Python was just a snake. He had zero technical knowledge. Yet Marcus proudly announced that Tyler would be taking over the daily risk assessment presentations to streamline our deliverables. Tyler gave a painfully generic presentation, clicking through slides of green check marks and manipulated thermal graphs, while Marcus nodded along like a proud father. I sat in the back of the room, completely isolated, watching the charade unfold. Suddenly, the terrifying reality of the situation locked into place. Aethirus Dynamics was currently in deep negotiations to be acquired by Vanguard Horizon, a massive investment fund. Marcus was not just tweaking numbers to look good. He was actively hiding a fatal hardware flaw to secure a multi-million-dollar buyout. And by stripping my access and replacing me with a clueless intern, he was building a firewall of plausible deniability. When Vanguard inevitably discovered that they bought a defective, dangerous product, Marcus would point the finger at the risk management department. He was setting me up to be the sole scapegoat for federal fraud. A normal person might have stood up, flipped the table, and screamed about the injustice of it all. A normal person would have quit on the spot. But I did not scream. I looked at Marcus, who was smiling at Tyler's hollow presentation, and I felt a strange, icy calm wash over me. I offered a faint, chilling smile to the empty space in front of me. I stood up quietly, slipped out of the conference room, and walked back to my desk. I opened a secure, encrypted terminal window hidden deep within my operating system. Marcus might have taken my admin rights, but he did not know that 3 years ago, I was the one who built the foundational architecture of the security grid. I did not need his permission to access the mainframe. I just needed to wake up the ghost I had left behind. I typed in a string of commands, initiating a hidden protocol I had designed for a rainy day, and the forecast had just called for a hurricane. The digital underworld of any corporate network is a quiet place. When you know where the load-bearing walls of a system are located, moving through it feels less like hacking and more like walking through your own house in the pitch black. 3 years ago, during the initial build of the testing framework, I embedded a legal, encrypted diagnostic tunnel. It was standard protocol for catastrophic failure recovery. A backdoor meant to rescue data if the main servers ever caught fire. Marcus had revoked my front door access, but he did not even know the foundation had a basement. I sat at my desk, my fingers moving methodically across the keyboard. I activated the tunnel and bypassed the primary user interface entirely. Within minutes, I had established a hidden, mirrored backup. It was a ghost node, silently siphoning the raw, unedited telemetry data directly from the engine testing bay straight to a secure external server I controlled. Every temperature spike, every pressure warning, every critical failure was now being recorded in real time, far out of Marcus's reach. With the raw data safely tucked away, I turned my attention to the counterfeit numbers being fed to the Vanguard Horizon investment team. I needed to know exactly how they were doctoring the files. It took me less than 20 minutes to trace the digital footprints left by Tyler, our newly appointed presentation boy. It was almost insulting how sloppy it was. He had not even written a custom algorithm. Tyler had pulled a cheap, open-source smoothing script off a basic programming forum. It was a script originally designed to level out audio frequencies, and he had applied it to the thermal-dynamic logs of an industrial turbine. The script took the terrifying spikes of heat, which climbed up to 450 degrees Celsius, and violently compressed them into a flat, safe, gentle wave. He was turning a potential explosion into a soothing lullaby. It was an astonishing level of negligence. A high school computer science student would have hidden their tracks better, but Tyler and Marcus simply did not care. I had to test the waters to see how deep Marcus's paranoia ran. Corporate policy dictated that any severe safety anomaly must be reported to the Internal Ethics and Compliance Board. I drafted a polite, entirely standard email regarding a minor discrepancy in the thermal outputs. It was a bait email, mild enough not to trigger panic, but specific enough to require an official log. I clicked send and immediately opened the mail server routing logs. The email never reached the ethics board. Less than 2 seconds after I sent it, the message was intercepted, quarantined, and permanently deleted. I traced the routing rule backward. Marcus had instructed the IT department to implement a silent filter on my employee identification number. Any outgoing message from my address containing the words safety, thermal, hazard, or Vanguard was instantly vaporized. He had built a digital cage around my desk, confident that I was screaming into a void. His confidence bled out of the digital realm and into the physical one during the all-hands department meeting the following Thursday. The room was packed with engineers, marketing associates, and legal aides, all buzzing with the energy of the impending Vanguard Horizon buyout. Marcus stood at the front, projecting a massive pie chart detailing our projected fourth-quarter growth. "We are moving into an era of hyper-acceleration," Marcus declared, pacing the floor. He paused and looked directly at me, a smirk playing on his lips. "And to do that, we have to shed the dead weight. We cannot afford to have team members who are conservative, stuck in the past, and obsessed with finding problems instead of creating solutions. We need visionaries, not roadblocks." A few of his loyalists chuckled. The implication was as clear as glass. As soon as the ink dried on the multi-million-dollar acquisition papers, I would be fired, discredited, and buried under a mountain of non-disclosure agreements. He wanted me to feel small. He wanted me to feel helpless. I just stared back at him, my expression completely blank. Let him enjoy the applause. Let him build his throne of lies. He had spent so much time curating his digital deception that he had completely ignored the physical reality of the company he was trying to sell. Later that evening, long after the open plan office had emptied out, I walked down the hall to the physical archives room. It was a dusty, windowless space filled with metal filing cabinets that nobody under the age of 40 ever bothered to open. Tech startups despise paper. They believe everything exists in the cloud. But I knew better. I used a brass key from my keychain to unlock a heavy fireproof cabinet in the very back corner. I pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. It was the original government defense grant contract, the foundational document that provided Aetherist Dynamics with its very first $2 million in seed funding. Marcus had never read it. He considered legacy contracts to be legal garbage, irrelevant to his modern startup vision. I placed the heavy stack of paper on the reading table and flipped to Section 4. Paragraph 12. The Asset Seizure Clause. When you accept federal money to build high-stakes hardware, the government demands absolute transparency. To secure that initial funding, I had personally drafted this specific liability shield to protect the engineering team from executive malpractice. The clause was beautifully, ruthlessly simple. It stated that if any safety data regarding the core technology was willfully falsified, altered, or obscured during a financial due diligence audit, the company would immediately forfeit all rights to the intellectual property. There would be no trial. There would be no boardroom negotiations or warning letters. The moment fraudulent data was presented to a financial institution, all patents, source codes, and physical hardware prototypes would be automatically repossessed and transferred to an independent legal trust to avoid federal liability. The mechanism was designed to instantly strip a corrupt company of its assets to prevent a dangerous product from ever hitting the public market. Marcus thought he was risking a fine or a stern talking to if he got caught. He did not realize that by falsifying the Vanguard Horizon reports, he was legally signing away the entire company. He was selling an empty box. All I had to do was make sure the lock snapped shut at the exact right moment. There is a profound, terrifying beauty in the architecture of a well-drafted legal document. People often mistake the law for a shield, something passive meant to deflect harm or mitigate damage. They do not realize that in the hands of someone who understands the precise syntax of liability, a contract is a highly calibrated weapon. I did not need to scream, throw a tantrum, or stage a public walkout to destroy Marcus. I just needed to step back and let him trigger the landmine I had buried years ago. I sat in the dim, quiet isolation of the physical archives room, my finger tracing the heavy faded ink of the original government defense grant. I reviewed the asset seizure clause word by agonizing word to ensure my memory of it was flawless. It was a masterpiece of corporate paranoia. Written during a time when Aetherist Dynamics was just a handful of exhausted engineers, terrified of going to federal prison if our early, highly volatile prototypes failed and caused a disaster. The clause was designed to be absolute and merciless. It explicitly dictated that any falsification of safety metrics, load-bearing capacities, or thermal dynamic logs during a formalized financial audit would immediately and automatically void the current executive ownership of the core technology. The true genius of this provision was its total autonomy. It did not require a judge to slam a gavel. It did not require a prolonged civil trial, which would take months of expensive litigation and give high-priced corporate lawyers time to find loopholes or negotiate a settlement. The contract was tethered to a digital smart protocol. If a cross-referencing audit ever detected a data variance of more than 5% between the raw physical testing outputs and the finalized financial disclosure documents, the protocol would execute. A digital guillotine would drop, severing the company from its own intellectual property in a matter of milliseconds. But the most devastating part of the clause, the ghost hiding quietly in the dense fine print, was the ultimate destination of those seized assets. The contract mandated that all patents, source codes, proprietary schematics, and physical hardware prototypes be instantly transferred to an independent legal entity to shield the government from associated liability. That entity was registered on paper as the Aegis Blind Trust. What Marcus and his team of slick venture capitalists did not know, simply because they never bothered to read the foundational legacy documents, was the true nature of that trust. When I incorporated the Aegis Blind Trust during our chaotic first year of operation, I installed a singular, ironclad safeguard to protect myself from exactly this kind of corporate betrayal. I was the sole legal signatory. I was the only authorized executor. The trust was entirely under my control. By falsifying the thermal data to sell the company to a massive investment fund, Marcus was not just voiding his own equity, he was legally, irreversibly handing the entire project directly to me. To ensure the trap sprang with lethal precision, the independent trust needed real-time access to the financial disclosure event. The Vanguard Horizon acquisition pitch was scheduled for Friday at 10 in the morning in our main glass-walled executive conference room. I had to build an invisible bridge between Marcus's fabricated presentation and my hidden reservoir of raw telemetry data. During my lunch hour on Wednesday, while the rest of the department was out at an expensive restaurant celebrating their anticipated buyout bonuses, I slipped into the main server room. I carried a standard maintenance tablet and a spool of Ethernet cable to blend in. But my actual work was far more surgical. I accessed the internal routing switch for the conference room's primary audio-visual network. I wrote a localized, untraceable script to mirror the outbound traffic. When Marcus plugged his sleek laptop into the podium to cast his slide deck, the feed would not just go to the massive wall monitor for the investors to see, it would simultaneously broadcast a duplicate data packet directly to the Aegis Trust's automated auditing software. The auditing software, which I had quietly running on an encrypted partition of my workstation, would take Marcus's projected numbers and aggressively cross-reference them against the live, unedited thermal logs I was secretly siphoning from the testing bay. The moment the software detected the massive, fatal discrepancies Tyler had so poorly concealed, the smart protocol would engage without requiring any manual authorization. The physical network was rigged, the automated audit was primed, but I needed one final element to make the legal lock impenetrable. In the eyes of the law, fraud requires a demonstration of intent. Ignorance, incompetence, or a simple failure to communicate can sometimes be used as a desperate defense in high-stakes corporate litigation. I had to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Marcus was explicitly aware of the hardware data variance and that he consciously chose to proceed with the deception anyway. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and opened a blank email. I had to navigate around the digital quarantine filter he had set up to delete my warnings. I could not use the words safety, thermal, hazard, or vanguard. Instead, I crafted a masterpiece of weaponized boredom. The subject line read, "Routine query regarding hardware data variants in upcoming quarter." The body of the email was a dense, 3-page wall of text. I filled it with agonizingly dull compliance jargon, citing obscure municipal building codes, abstract risk management philosophies, and endless formatting requirements for data storage. It was the exact kind of email that makes an executive's eyes glaze over within 3 seconds of opening it. However, buried right in the middle of the second page, written in plain, undeniable text, was a direct notification. I stated clearly that the current presentation models did not match the physical stress test outputs and required immediate correction before any external disclosures or financial evaluations could legally take place. I attached a hidden tracking pixel to the message to confirm exactly when it was opened, and I hit send. I sat in my chair and watched my monitor. The office around me hummed with the sound of ringing phones, the clacking of keyboards, and casual chatter. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I knew exactly how his mind worked. He would see a massive wall of compliance text from the employee he had just stripped of administrative power, and he would feel a surge of intense annoyance. He would not read the actual document, but his colossal ego would not allow him to simply ignore it. He had to assert his dominance. He had to have the last word to prove who was in charge. At exactly 4:15 in the afternoon, a notification popped up on my screen. Marcus had replied. I opened the message. There were no corporate pleasantries. There was no attempt to understand the data or ask for clarification regarding the variance. He had replied with a single, damning sentence. Stop getting in the way and let the people who know business work. I read the sentence 3 times. A cold, profound satisfaction settled deep into my bones, chilling me from the inside out. He had just signed his own professional death warrant. By replying, he legally confirmed receipt of the variance warning. By telling me to stop getting in the way, he explicitly ordered me to ignore a critical hardware failure in favor of his business transaction. He had just handed me the irrefutable, documented proof of his intentional, malicious fraud. I printed a hard copy of his email, slipped it into a plastic protective sleeve, and locked it in my desk drawer. Every piece was now perfectly in place. The network was tapped, the trust was ready to receive the assets, and the proof of intent was secured. I looked out across the open-plan office, watching Marcus laugh loudly at a joke someone had made near the coffee machine. He looked so incredibly victorious, standing there in his expensive clothes. He had no idea that he was a dead man walking. I was no longer an oppressed employee fighting to save my job. I was the executioner, and I was simply waiting for the clock to strike the hour. Friday morning arrived with an obnoxious level of cheer. The atmosphere inside the office felt less like a workplace and more like a high-end club right before the very important people arrive. Marcus had catered an absurdly expensive breakfast spread. The smell of artisanal pastries and imported espresso masked the underlying stench of corporate rot. His loyalists were buzzing around the bullpen, exchanging high fives and flashing practiced, plastic smiles. They were already spending their anticipated buyout bonuses in their heads. I sat quietly at my desk, sipping lukewarm tap water, a solitary island of stillness in a sea of premature celebration. At 9:45, the crowd parted as Marcus sauntered over to my cubicle. He was wearing a brand-new, tailored blazer over his signature designer t-shirt. He looked down at me, his eyes gleaming with the predatory satisfaction of a man who believes he has completely crushed his opposition. "Emery," he said, his voice dripping with forced sympathy and undeniable condescension. "You have been working so hard lately. You look exhausted. Why do you not take the rest of the day off? In fact, take Monday and Tuesday as well. Clear your head." He leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I need everyone in that room today projecting absolute synergy. I cannot risk any negative energy or legacy thinking ruining this deal. Go home, relax, let the adults handle the finish line." The sheer arrogance radiating from him was almost suffocating. He wanted to watch me surrender. He wanted the visceral thrill of seeing me pack my bags and walk out the door in defeat. So, I gave him exactly what he wanted. I let my shoulders slump. I looked down at my keyboard, letting a look of mild defeat wash over my face. "Okay, Marcus," I murmured softly, avoiding his gaze. "If that is what you think is best." I slowly began gathering my things, slipping my personal notebook and a spare sweater into my tote bag. Marcus smiled, a wide, triumphant grin that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He patted the top of my cubicle wall like a proud owner petting a disciplined dog, then turned and walked away toward the executive suite, practically floating on his own ego. His victory felt absolute. I walked toward the main elevators, swiped my badge, and stepped inside. But when the doors slid shut, I did not press the button for the ground floor lobby. I pressed the button for the 7th floor. The 7th floor housed a sleek, glass-enclosed employee cafe that hovered directly over the central atrium. Because of the open-concept architecture, the cafe offered a perfect, unobstructed bird-eye view of the main executive conference room located on the floor below. The conference room was essentially a giant, transparent glass box. From my vantage point by the railing, looking down, it was like peering into a brilliantly lit terrarium. The cafe was entirely empty. Everyone else was downstairs hovering around the excitement. I pulled out a chair at a small corner table directly above the glass room and sat down. I took my laptop out of my bag, opened the lid, and connected to the secure external server. I booted up the real-time monitoring software of the independent trust. A blank, black terminal window appeared on my screen, a cursor blinking steadily in the darkness, waiting for a data stream. I rested my hands lightly on the keyboard and looked down through the glass floor of the cafe. Exactly at 10 o'clock, the heavy oak doors of the atrium swung open. The delegation from Vanguard Horizon walked in. There were 5 of them, moving in a tight, synchronized formation. They wore sharp, immaculate suits and carried thick leather briefcases. Their faces were stony, analytical, and completely devoid of the frat house enthusiasm Marcus had cultivated. They were sharks swimming into a tank that Marcus mistakenly believed he owned. They entered the glass conference room and took their seats around the massive mahogany table. Marcus was waiting for them at the head of the room, beaming, gesturing expansively toward the blank presentation screen. Tyler, the intern, stood nervously in the corner, holding a small silver thumb drive. Marcus signaled to Tyler. Tyler stepped forward and handed the drive over. I watched Marcus hold it up, saying something to the investors with a charming smile. That tiny piece of metal contained the forged thermal logs, the flattened data, the grand lie that would secure his multi-million-dollar buyout. I took a deep breath, the air cold in my lungs. Marcus turned toward the podium, leaned over, and slotted the flash drive into the main projector system. The countdown had begun. Down below, Marcus began to speak, though I was separated from the boardroom by thick, soundproof architectural glass. The internal corporate live stream playing on a minimized window of my screen fed his voice directly into my earpiece. "Gentlemen," Marcus projected, pacing with the practiced, arrogant rhythm of a man who loved the sound of his own voice. "Today, we are not just looking at a piece of hardware, we are looking at the next century of industrial energy." While he commanded the room with his tailored suit and empty promises, up above, my world was entirely silent. The terminal window on my screen sprang to life. Lines of encrypted code began to cascade down the monitor as the packet sniffer I had covertly installed on the conference room network switch woke up. Marcus brought up his first slide. It was a beautiful, sleek, 3-dimensional render of the AeroCore engine, spinning slowly against a stark black background. He talked about unparalleled efficiency. He talked about infinite scalability. He looked those investors dead in the eyes and promised them a multi-billion-dollar return on their investment within 36 months. The lead partner from Vanguard Horizon, a silver-haired executive with a predatory gaze, gave a slow, approving nod. On my screen, the data stream suddenly accelerated into a blur. Marcus had just instructed Tyler to initiate the formal file transfer, sending the comprehensive due diligence package over the local network directly into the hands of the Vanguard analysts who were waiting on standby. My routing script performed flawlessly. It intercepted the transmission, duplicated every single byte, and funneled the copy straight into the jaws of the Aegis Trust auditing software without dropping a single packet. Unprecedented stability, Marcus boasted loudly, clicking to a new slide. A massive graph appeared behind him, displaying a perfectly flat, soothing blue line that supposedly represented the engine's thermal output under maximum stress. As you can clearly see right here, our thermal regulation is absolutely flawless. There are no heat spikes. There is no degradation. The core remains perfectly cool. My screen immediately split into two distinct panels. On the left side, my software rendered the exact data Marcus was currently broadcasting to the room. It was a flat, mathematically impossible lie. On the right side, the software pulled the raw, unedited telemetry data I had been secretly siphoning from the physical testing bay all week. The contrast was horrifying. The right side of my screen was a jagged, violent mountain range of crimson red, showing core temperatures screaming toward catastrophic physical meltdown. The auditing algorithm engaged. It began aggressively comparing the two datasets in real time, hunting for the discrepancy. A progress bar at the bottom of my screen filled with terrifying speed: 10%, 20%, 50%. Down in the glass box, Marcus leaned casually against the heavy mahogany table. We have optimized every conceivable metric to guarantee safety. The aero core is completely de-risked. You are buying perfection. The progress bar on my monitor hit 100%. The algorithm finalized its comparison, and the numbers flashed onto my screen in stark, unforgiving white text. The software had calculated the exact difference between the forged financial disclosure documents and the burning reality of the hardware. The variance was exactly 40%. In the realm of high-stakes industrial engineering, a 1% variance is an anomaly that requires a meeting. A 5% variance is a crisis that halts production. A 40% variance is an intentional, malicious, and criminal fabrication of reality. The system had found the fraud. The terminal background instantly shifted from a cold black to a deep, alarming crimson. A dialog box materialized right in the center of the screen. The text was sharp, absolute, and legally binding. Financial fraud confirmed. Critical safety variance detected. Initiate asset seizure protocol. Below the text, a single, heavy gray button waited. Approve. I looked down through the glass floor. Marcus was raising his hands, painting a vibrant picture of total market dominance. He looked like a king standing at the very peak of a conquered empire, basking in the silent admiration of the Vanguard executives. I did not take a deep breath. I did not hesitate. I did not even blink. I simply moved my cursor over the gray button and clicked the mouse. The response was instantaneous. The Aegis Trust software unleashed a barrage of automated legal injunctions and network embargoes with the speed of a digital blitzkrieg. Within mere milliseconds, the protocol fired off encrypted seizure orders straight into the administrative root of the Aetherus Dynamics mainframe. Like a swarm of locusts, the code locked down every single patent registry. It froze the proprietary source code repositories. It violently revoked all administrative network access credentials across the entire building. But the protocol was designed to be merciless, and it did not stop at our own borders. The legal clause dictated full transparency with the defrauded party. My software instantly generated and dispatched an emergency legal notice directly to the external servers of Vanguard Horizon's compliance division. The automated emails detailed the exact nature of the thermal variance fraud and formally informed them that the proprietary asset they were currently sitting in a room trying to purchase had just been legally repossessed by an independent trust. Up in the quiet, empty cafe, my laptop hummed softly. The heavy lifting was done. The digital guillotine had fallen, severing the head of the company before anyone even realized the blade had dropped. Down in the conference room, completely oblivious to the catastrophic network annihilation happening in the server racks directly beneath his feet. Marcus confidently clicked to his final slide. It was the Aetherist Dynamics Company logo, bold and bright. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice echoing with absolute, unshakable triumph through my earpiece. "The Aero Core is fully stable, fully optimized, and completely ready for the market. The future is ours." He smiled a brilliant, winning smile, completely unaware that the ground he was standing on had already turned to dust. Marcus's brilliant, winning smile was entirely frozen on his face. He stood at the podium, arms spread wide to welcome his billion-dollar future, completely oblivious to the fact that the giant digital display wall behind him had just experienced a violent, catastrophic shift. The sleek, three-dimensional spinning logo of Aetherist Dynamics did not just disappear, it was violently purged. The screen flickered wildly, emitting a harsh, sharp audio feedback screech that echoed off the glass walls and made the investors flinch in their expensive leather chairs. The display went completely black for one agonizing, breathless second. Then, it ignited into a blinding, solid, blood-red canvas. In the center of the crimson glow, massive white block letters spelled out a single, devastating sentence: "Federal Asset Seizure Directive initiated. All system access locked." Before Marcus could even turn around to comprehend the massive red warning glaring behind him, the heavy silence in the room was completely shattered. All 5 of the Vanguard Horizon executives had their cell phones erupt at the exact same moment. It was a jarring, chaotic chorus of synthetic ringtones and urgent vibrations echoing against the glass. The lead partner, the silver-haired man who had been nodding along with Marcus just moments before, pulled his phone from his breast pocket. He looked at the caller identification, and his relaxed demeanor instantly vanished, his brow furrowing into a deep, aggressive scowl. "It is my compliance division," the lead partner muttered, holding up a stiff hand to stop Marcus from uttering a single word. He answered the call and immediately put it on speakerphone, setting the device down on the mahogany table. A frantic, tinny voice echoed through the room, instructing them to cease all negotiations, step away from the table, and exit the building immediately. The compliance officer explicitly detailed that the intellectual property they were currently trying to purchase did not legally belong to Aetherist Dynamics anymore. A massive, intentional discrepancy in the thermal safety data had just triggered an automatic fraud protocol, and the assets were currently under the hostile control of an independent blind trust. The blood completely drained from Marcus's face, leaving his skin the color of wet ash. He spun around, finally reading the massive red directive on the wall. "No, no, no, this is impossible," he stammered, his polished, arrogant corporate persona instantly evaporating into pure, unfiltered panic. "This is just a glitch. It is a minor software error in the presentation deck. Tyler, fix it. Fix it right now." Tyler, looking completely terrified and entirely out of his depth, shrunk back against the wall, clutching his useless presentation notes. Marcus slammed his palms onto the podium keyboard, frantically hitting the escape key over and over again. He tried to pull up the system task manager. He desperately tried to force a hard reboot of the machine, but the podium monitor only mirrored the glaring red screen on the wall. A tiny prompt in the bottom corner of his screen provided the final nail in his digital coffin. It read, "User credentials revoked." He was completely locked out, not just from the presentation slide deck, but from the entire corporate network. His digital empire, his entire leverage over the company, had been vaporized in a single keystroke. Marcus opened his mouth to formulate another lie, to spin another hollow narrative for the investors, but he never got the chance to speak. The heavy oak doors of the conference room were suddenly shoved open with incredible force. It was not the IT department coming down to fix a computer glitch. 3 large men wearing tactical black suits and earpieces strode into the room with terrifying military purpose. They were a specialized private security firm contracted exclusively by the Aegis Blind Trust, operating strictly under the legal parameters of the Asset Seizure Clause. The lead officer marched straight past the bewildered, defensive investors and approached the center of the mahogany table, where a gleaming, functional metallic scale model of the AeroCore engine sat on a velvet display stand. He slapped a thick, legally binding injunction document right onto the glass surface of Marcus's podium. "Marcus Vance," the officer stated, his voice a flat, booming baritone that left absolutely no room for negotiation or argument. "By order of the Aegis Blind Trust, and in accordance with federal fraud prevention statutes, we are executing a physical repossession. We are seizing all physical prototypes, hardware schematics, and intellectual property associated with the AeroCore project immediately." Without waiting for a response, or even acknowledging Marcus's presence further, the other two security officers stepped forward. They lifted the heavy engine prototype off the table and placed it securely into a reinforced, shock-proof transit case they had carried into the room. The Vanguard Horizon executives did not need to see anything else. The lead partner reached down, ended his phone call, slipped his phone back into his pocket, and aggressively snapped his briefcase shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the tense room. "You absolute fool!" the partner snarled, staring at Marcus with a look of absolute, unadulterated disgust. "You brought us in here to buy a literal bomb, and you actually thought you could hide it with a cheap, manipulated graph. My legal team will be filing a massive corporate fraud and damages lawsuit against you personally by 5 o'clock this afternoon. Do not ever contact my firm again." The five men turned on their heels and marched out of the glass room, leaving the door wide open behind them. The security team followed closely behind, carrying the physical embodiment of the company's only valuable asset out the door and into the hallway. Marcus was left standing entirely alone at the front of the room. The harsh red light from the warning screen washed over his expensive, tailored suit, casting long, pathetic shadows across the floor. He was surrounded by glossy, freshly printed financial disclosure reports that were now completely worthless pieces of paper. His breathing was shallow and erratic, slowly, as if waking from a terrible, suffocating nightmare. Marcus lifted his head. He looked past the empty chairs where the investors had sat. He looked past the open doors. He looked up, through the glass ceiling of the conference room, straight toward the 7th floor cafe. And he saw me. We locked eyes. There was no glass thick enough, no distance great enough, to hide the crushing realization crashing down on him in that exact moment. He knew exactly what had happened. He knew who had built the engine, who had written the original government contract, and who had just pulled the lever on the guillotine. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I did not wave. The punishment he was experiencing was far too absolute to require any theatrical display of victory on my part. I simply stared back at him with the cold, unfeeling precision of the legal system I had built to trap him. Maintaining intense, unbroken eye contact, I reached out and pushed the lid of my laptop down until it clicked shut. The sound was small, but it finalized everything. I stood up from my table, slung my bag over my shoulder, turned my back on the glass floor, and walked away into the quiet cafe, leaving behind a man who had just enthusiastically orchestrated the complete and utter destruction of his own life. Hello, everyone. Thank you so sincerely for listening to the conclusion of today's story. It means the absolute world to us. Where are you listening to this story from today? Please let us know down in the comments below. If you found today's story satisfying and want to help us out, please consider joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon. As we mentioned at the beginning, YouTube has disabled our monetization, so your direct support is the only way we can keep bringing you these incredible tales of justice. Over on Patreon, you will find our very best, most exclusive true stories that we simply cannot share publicly on YouTube, all fully voiced by our team of emotional actors. You can join right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment. Thank you again for being such an amazing audience, and we will see you in the next one.